Statements by Ministers none. Public Bill, second reading.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true that the appropriation 2020 and 2021 bill, number 3 of 2020, has been presented at a time of unprecedented crisis. And it is also true to say that this unprecedented crisis is, without any doubt, one of the worst in modern history. And I will agree that just a few months ago, no one would have imagined that we would be faced with such a calamity, and that nearly half of the world's population would be confined in their homes. However, this is where I start disagreeing with the Honorable Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Development. Indeed, we need to go back to the beginning of the year and understand what went wrong in our country. We need to go into the circumstances which brought the coronavirus into Mauritius. And I'm of the view that this government is responsible for 3 blunders, for which, Mr. Speaker, they'll have to answer one day. The first one is when, in a press conference held in the presence of the Honorable Minister of Health, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the CEO of Air Mauritius, it was forcefully stated that it was out of questions to stop flights from China, even if it was known that the coronavirus was killing hundreds of Chinese citizens. The second blunder was when, in another press conference, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs stated that it would be out of question for Mauritius to close its frontiers despite the spread of COVID-19 virus internationally. The third and last blunder of the government in the handling of the virus was its failure to ensure proper monitoring and surveillance of incoming passengers with the announcement of the sanitary curfew on the 18th of March. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I read that New Zealand was almost out of the woods, and its last patient, it has recovered from coronavirus. And I look forward to the day when our last patient would recover, and I pray that our friends who are coming from overseas, who will land in Mauritius, I hope when they are moved to the quarantine, that they will not be charged with any fee. And I've been told that each one of them will have to pay more than $1,300 to be quarantined. Those coming, those working on cruise ships, and I thought at one time that there was already an agreement that they would be airlifted without any cost. But we'll look into this when they arrive. Now, the joy of the Minister of Finance is that he's a great manager. He's been able to unite the whole country against this government, although it wouldn't have been an arduous task because they don't have the popular support. But anyway, it's good to remind him that he tried to justify a number of unjust, arbitrary, unacceptable, unfair, and inequitable measures under the garb of the coronavirus. And in my discourse, I will uncover his deceits, where he was deceitful, his half-truth, unanswered question, where he failed to enlighten the population when he ought to have. The coronavirus must not be a catchphrase, the excuse or the pretext for inequitable or inappropriate measures to be inflicted on our citizens. The members on the other side of the House, I'm sure throughout over the next 10 days, will brag about the palatable measures contained in the budget. But as we say, the devil's always in the details. But the country must realize, and people do, people are being made aware, and they are taking stock of the harsh realities, that these measures have only been made possible by snatching away 60 billion rupees from the central bank. And when you add these 60 billion rupees to the 18 billion rupees at the beginning of the year, and to the 80 billion rupees announced this month, it is clear that this government is jeopardizing the future in a very short term. Already the Honorable Minister shows tragic sense of humor when he stated that he has presented a balanced budget. He meant the 158 billion taxpayers' money forcefully gifted to government by the Bank of Mauritius. Later on, we'll come to coercive measures, Mr. Speaker, sir. As if you are taking dividends from your own company and say that it will have no impact upon your balance sheet, nor on the company itself. What is the policy of this government? Spend, 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 and spend taxpayers' money till there's no fiscal space. This is reckless, Mr. Speaker. No one is against the Bank of Mauritius fulfilling its role as a lender of last resort. But taxpayers, irrespective being large, medium, or small, feel aggrieved when government acts as a big spender and spend money that belongs to the nation in all opacity. This is a government, and we heard the minister when he delivered his speech, this is a government which reads poetry but governs in opacity. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that South Africa Central Bank has ruled out financing government? The Bank of Mauritius, as I say, is a lender of last resort, but is not a spender. Even if it has to finance loan or subsidize loan or support the planters or any bank, it has to be done in accordance with the provisions of Banking Act. And as a former Minister of Finance of India stated, Mr. Sinha, who was also Minister of Foreign Affairs, he stated that central bank can monetize debt subject that it is secure, that it is liquid, and has return on its investment. South Africa Central Bank rules out financing government through loans to fund its runaway budget deficit. And I read what the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of South Africa stated. If we were to finance government directly, there would be no pressure on government to manage their costs in any way. Mr. Speaker, unlike New Zealand, Mauritius went on a spending spree and opted for a free takeaway from the Bank of Mauritius. The minister can mislead himself or mislead his friends in cabinet or his parliamentary friends. But he cannot mislead the population. He has no legitimate right to mislead the population. He has been elected to represent the people of this country, to voice out, to speak with a mind which is reflective of the well-being of the population. And if unpalatable statements have to be made, they have to. But you don't lull a population. And as I say, unlike New Zealand, public debt as a percentage of GDP is certainly not what New Zealand has, certainly not less than 35%. But they like to compare between what happened when we were in government and since they took over in 2014. Let us look at the income per capita of a great little country. It has remained at $10,000 since 2014 to pre-COVID. Why? Because government became a big spender instead of acting with restraint to encourage savings and investment. It did not broaden the economic base and failed to have a growth of over 5%, which it promised when the alleged dream team led this government. In 2008, Mr. Speaker, under the Labour PMSD government, growth rate was 5.8%. When it faced the triple shocks, the food, the fuel, and the finance. And I'm not saying that circumstances which prevailed then are the same that we are currently going through. But the fact remains that there was no problem in respect of payment of PRB or end-of-year bonus. And this morning I had Mr. Emmerich over the radio. It's sad that somebody is representing the core of the civil service, spokesperson for the civil service, was not even called by relevant parties in government to discuss a matter which is fundamental. And what is he saying? We are not saying that money should be disbursed, but as representatives of workers, of civil servants, they have a right to be heard. When called upon to make sacrifice, everyone is willing to make sacrifice. But you cannot treat representative of workers with disdain or with contempt. It goes against good governance, Mr. Speaker. During the duration of the 2 years of the financial crisis, there was no loss of employment. And government had the fiscal space to come up with 2 stimulus packages. And the Bank of Mauritius was not under siege, Mr. Speaker. What was the rate of growth in 2018-2019? 3%. What was forecasted when they took over and after the budget was presented? That as from 2015 onwards, growth would reach 5.7% of GDP. But it has remained below 3.2% till December 29. And the dream team brought a nightmare. What was not promised? Construction of houses for low-income group, galore. But what was delivered? Hardly any core housing unit. The promise, job creation, what did we end up with? 25% of unemployed amongst the youth. And the incidence of unemployment in the women workforce was constantly on the rise. Now we agree that the sanitary measures has provoked an unprecedented economic, psychosocial, and financial hardship. But government is indifferent, insensitive, continues to be reckless, and rules by opacity. Today, government is reckless with money required to secure the future of our children. As matters stand, each child has a mounting debt of more than 350,000 rupees. And it's a debt which is bound to go up. But the people are tired. They don't want to tolerate a government which thrives on a culture of opacity. Government may be government. Government is government, and government so decides to run this country with extra budgetary special purpose vehicles. And what are they, those so-called special purpose vehicles? They are adding more and more when we look into the budget estimates. These are special purpose vehicles outside the purview of the scrutiny of Parliament. And what we've been told, of the 60 billion rupees which they've snatched from the Bank of Mauritius, 27 billion has been earmarked for capital, as far as we know. When there's a call for financing of capital projects, usually we take loan which is allocated to countries on a concessionary basis, and the repayment is long-term. I would like to know on what basis has this money, has such sum be allocated for capital expenditure and for recurrent expenditure. I think we have to know on what basis has this allocation been done. Mr. Speaker, we know the habit of this government. It has to pay for largesse because no savings has been made, and on the other hand, expenditure for capital project will be channeled by a special purpose vehicle. Therefore, taxpayers' money, yet again, will be used with little oversight. As responsible parents, Mr. Speaker, I don't know of anyone who takes savings from the piggy bank of our children, or are the parents encouraged to raid central bank. This is not the legacy that we will bequeath to our children, in our humble opinion. The money has to be borrowed, albeit at a very concessional rate, as is done in all countries where there is separation of powers, good governance, and oversight. Of course, the volume of loan has to be bound and time-bound. Under exceptional circumstances, exceptional measures are taken, but the risks should not be exceptional. They should be measured. Hence, the provision for government to borrow in exceptional circumstances up to more than 25% of its recurrent expenditure. But the regime wants freebies. Make no mistake that it has dispensed no favors to the population with alleged populist measures. Simply, it's money that has been disbursed from the Bank of Mauritius that has been used lavishly to meet unnecessary expenditure, because this government does not have a culture of restraint. And COVID is mere pretext to squander taxpayers' money. Let me remind the House of the 4 rupees tax on the liter of fuel oil, which is indeed a tax burden. The depreciation of the rupee is an additional tax. And as a net food and fuel importing country, all prices have gone up massively. When they took over, Mr. Speaker, US dollar was selling at 33 rupees, whereas on the 4th, 6th, 20, it was selling at the shocking price of 40 rupees 15 cents. During the course of the debate, Honorable Sikyan will produce a price list, much to the delight of the House. Fraud and corruption, wastage, all these are additional financial burden on taxpayers, tantamount to additional taxes. When the Minister of Finance announced that the price of 12-kilogram gas cylinder has gone down, there was applause. But little did they realize that if government has been able to bring down the price, it has nothing to do with government, largely due to the levy that has been imposed at the petrol pump, Mr. Speaker. Did our friends on government bench ask of the massive windfall gain made by STC and CD? Did the backbenchers lobby for a decrease in utilities bill? I'm sure ministers go to supermarkets or chemist shops unattended, and they walk freely amongst the crowd, though they go unrecognized when they wear the mask, and I don't know whether they have to wear protective helmets to protect them from the angry crowd. But can anybody justify the massive increase in prices? Let me, Mr. Speaker, dwell briefly on the plan de résistance, which I will develop later. The plan de résistance is the 18 billion rupees whose objective was initially announced in a communiqué issued by the Bank of Mauritius to salvage enterprises with turnover of 100 million rupees in two strategic sectors with systemic problems like tourism and textile and garments. Now, if the cycle is widened to include food sovereignty, ICT, or blue economy, there is no harm. But when government gives firm instruction to bring in doubtful investors who have already obtained tax holidays certificates since 2017, then it stands to reason that the Mauritius Investment Corporation will never be answerable to Parliament. As of now, no PQ, I've been told, is allowed in relation to SBM or even Air Mauritius, even on Air Mauritius, despite that Air Mauritius is no longer listed on the stock exchange. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to sound nasty, but as matters stand, and I've been told that, and rumors are floating, that the stripper of the asset is likely to conclude a strategic partnership with a big entrepreneur from Madagascar to set up an Air Mauritius regional airline, and I hope this is not true. The minister should not forget that we are under the constant gaze of international funding agencies, credit rating agencies, and we are bending backwards to the EU to convey strong signals that we are new normal and will be in the vanguard of the fight against money laundering and combating financing of terrorism. I hope all the deficiencies will be plugged, though it's never too late. And it's good to note that Prime Minister, I don't know what has been the outcome of his conversation with Mr. Michel, but I hope that there will be outcome, provided, of course, all the deficiencies are plugged. But as we say, there are miles to go and a long way to go, and I'll come to this at a later stage. Mr. Speaker, government has been passive to the decline in tourism and export earnings, foreign disinvestment on the stock exchange, and is responsible for the negative impact of the EU blacklisting on external capital flow. With the COVID-19 matters exacerbating, and the impact, of course, is felt on our balance of payment. MRA will forego 15 billion, if not more, in tax collection by December. Mr. Speaker, if we refer to EPZ sector, on the third and fourth quarters of 2019, there is a respective decrease, when we look at the figures, of 10 and 11% respectively. The trade deficit in 2019 stood at 120 billion rupees and stands to reach 130 billion rupees for year 2020. Net export down by 25 billion. In other words, we have access to remunerative markets, but since 2015, we have not been able to grasp opportunities to increase our export of seafood, sugar, textile, garment, and other products. Usually, we have a positive balance of trade in services used to make up for shortfall in trade of goods, but our reduced capital inflows and possible outflows have worsened the situation, and the consequences are far-reaching. So, Speaker, since there is no revenue from tourism, travel and leisure, which is the tourism being the cornerstone of our economy, the shortfall is from a net receipt of 63 billion rupees. Air Mauritius transport 50% of our tourists and airlift our cargo to many destinations. In comparing year to year, tourism recipients are likely to go down by 40 billion rupees. Direct investment lower by 10 billion rupees. Net export lower by 25 billion rupees, resulting in a total worsening of 75 billion rupees. Instead of a surplus, balance of payment could register a large deficit of at least 40 billion rupees, not counting capital outflow. Balance of payment for this year will engulf 1 billion rupees from Bank of Mauritius import cover, and over the 2 years can be as high as 80 billion rupees. So, Speaker, 30% of the workforce is affected in the sector, and I hope that there is that recovery will start soon. And as a small island developing states, if we don't export, we die. Mr. Speaker, besides, with respect to COVID-19 Program Development Fund, which is an SPV and extra budgetary, government, as we say, is government, and government so decide. We know that sizable expenditure in relation to Safe City project at a cost of 18 billion rupees have been frontlined to Mauritius Telecom, while government is making smaller payments to Mauritius Telecom over several years. The manipulation of public data to dissimulate the runway expansion of public spending has proved more difficult than cloaking the deficit. Official public debt has continued to grow in the past years to reach 70% of GDP, pre-COVID, including the undisturbed debt commitments taken by SBM for Metro Express or Mauritius Telecom for Safe City and Caddo projects, and borrowing from non-financial public sector entities. Mr. Speaker, today, Mauritius Telecom and other companies are finding it difficult to procure dollars on the market for repayment of loans, Mr. Speaker. As I say, only an opaque government will shift the blame of mismanagement of the economy on the contagion of COVID-19. Let me compare the expenditures of financial year 2018-2019 to 2020-2021. I have avoided financial year 2019-2020 because of COVID-19. We'll look at specific items. 8 billion rupees earmarked to support workers who are furloughed, that is, on technical assistance. But we don't know for how long. Whether this amount will be extended to self-employed and to those in informal sectors who find it very difficult to eke out a living. The only thing that we know that each individual in traineeship, formal and informal sectors will have a TAN number. Mr. Speaker, my worry is that since there is no buoyancy in the economy, revenue has remained the same. And I'm comparing to financial 2018-2019. And it cannot be sustained. Debt cannot be sustained, and our gross public debt as a percentage of GDP is 83%. and consolidated deficit is about 71 billion rupees. As some friends would say, we are no longer on a helicopter, but on the Soviet Soyuz heading for a crash. Mr. Speaker, I've given you a foretaste of the voracious appetite of this government as a big spender. The 158 billion rupees is indeed a lot of money. Who cares about debt or lack of fiscal space? Live recklessly today and leave the repayments of debt to the millennial. And the transfer of the 60 billion from the Bank of Mauritius as budget revenue is a travesty of fiscal reality. In fact, it is simply a financial transfer and not a revenue. The consolidated deficit of government, including of off-budget expenditure with special funds for 2020-21, stands at about 71 billion rupees, or 50% of GDP. Assuming the customary shortfall in capital spending, the deficit would be 14% of GDP. And this huge deficit has to be financed. And it will be financed by money which they've obtained from Bank of Mauritius and support loan from Agence Française de Développement for 13 billion rupees. And it was Minister Buddha, who, with an effortless sense of superiority, stated in this very House, when he intervened on COVID-19 and quarantine bills, that government would not have recourse to external funding agencies. And yet, when we look at the estimates, not only they are borrowing from Agence Française de Développement, potential lenders are the La Banque Africaine de Développement and the IMF. And time will tell if they will borrow money from IMF, because we know what conditions will be imposed upon. Mr. Speaker, for how long will government use helicopter money to finance shortfall in revenue? Bonanza money doesn't last, and we don't know what will happen next year. Gross public sector debt is expected to increase from 329 billion rupees in March to 390 billion rupees in June, or by about 60 billion rupees. Gross public sector debt will thus reach a record level of 83% of GDP. And the budget estimates project that public debt stabilizes at the level of 390 billion rupees until June 2021. Irrespective of figures submitted by the minister, the inflationary situation fed by free money creation from the Bank of Mauritius will harm the prospect for a strong economic recovery post-COVID. It is now clear why the prescribed public debt ceilings in the Public Debt Management Act were abolished. The newly defined cash and cash equivalents, including any equity investment held in any private sector entity, is a colorable device to artificially reduce gross debt. And this concoction of a whopping 50 billion rupees in June 2020 has been estimated and is referred in the budget estimates in page 433. This is why we must continue to focus on gross and not net public debt. As Warren Buffett famously remarked, and I know Honorable Minister is a great disciple of Warren Buffett, I'm sure he has taken cognizance of what Warren Buffett said. Not only that he's willing to pay taxes, as he said, but this is, I will quote, "You will see who's swimming naked when the tide runs out." The tide and time is running out for this government. Mr. Speaker, the government is, in the words of the former governor of the bank, a reeling drunkard, who after a dry spell will go on a binge and will drink like a fish. Unfortunately, the Bank of Mauritius is not an ocean, and there is no untapped delivery, and if there is, it is limited, Mr. Speaker. And the reason is simple. Bank of Mauritius has been unable to raise a single rupee on savings bond of the special relief program of 5 billion rupees for onward lending to commercial banks. State Investment Corporation has equally failed to deliver with its redeemable preference shares. How on earth will Bank of Mauritius mop up as loan the 40 billion rupees on the domestic capital market in exchange for bonds when it has failed with a sum of 5 billion rupees? Some will argue that if this is done, it goes against quantitative easing. Mr. Speaker, I suspect that they will have no alternative than printing money, and it will increase depreciation and inflation. 3 weeks ago, the reserves were down by 700 million rupees, and the rupee is expected to depreciate by another 20%. And what it means when we go to the shop, to the chemist shop, prices have gone up, there's been erosion in our power purchasing, with the consequence that we are getting poorer. And of course, we know that inflation is an additional tax, a heavy burden upon those at the lower rung of the ladder, especially. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the minister also that according to IMF, our reserves are barely adequate. And if we refer to the latest IMF report, we've been called upon to build our reserves. And if we don't reverse gear and address macroeconomic fundamentals and come with an adequate framework and show our goodwill to rein in expenditure, we are in big trouble. As of now, problems are compounding. And certainly, we are not the blue-eyed bird of any institution, let alone the difficulties that we are facing as a tax haven, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's not something that we wish, nor we would like to happen. We certainly don't want to see any capital leaving our country. But one thing is certain, not much is coming into the country also. And we know the relevance and importance to our economy of capital inflows, Mr. Speaker. And we have to be able also to make the difference between what is in the Bank of Mauritius and what is capital inflow, and what is the volume of money that global business bring into the country. I would hate to say that it comes easy, and it goes out very easily also. That's why the reputation of our country as a financial center has to be a center of repute. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to pension, another instance of half-truth or no truth. Clear example of opacity which can mislead the average Mauritian. The minister's averments at pages 21, 22 of his speech may well mark the end of the non-contributory universal pension which was introduced by the Labour Party years and years ago. The non-contributory universal pension, which has ensured the livelihoods of hundreds and thousands of pensioners over the years, is possibly now endangered. And when we talk of basic pension, Mr. Speaker, this pension also helps those who are physically handicapped, widows and orphans, people who are bedridden. But our pension system is being rocked aside. Non-contributory pension, that is pension for those who are 60 and up to 65 years old, they will apparently earn only 9,000 rupees per month. And this is to be found in paragraph 164 of the minister's speech. Mr. Speaker, this is not a favor being dispensed to pensioners or to those who need pension because of the undue hardship they are facing, physically or mentally. This is not a favor, it is a right. Under this government, it looks like old age pension will no longer be universal, but will be targeted. As I say, is it the beginning of the end of non-contributory universal pension? And what did Prime Minister promise on World Elderly Day in October of 2019? A progressive increase in pensions of 9,000 rupees from 2019 up to 13,500 in 2024. Yet at paragraph 165 and 166 of his speech, the Minister of Finance announced that henceforth all increases in benefits to our elderly will be paid through a contributory system. Contribution sociale généralisée. This seems to imply that payments above 9,000 rupees per month will only be paid by way of this contributory mechanism called contribution sociale généralisée. What is worse is that it appears that additional guaranteed monthly income generated through this contributory system will only be paid to citizens above the normal retirement age of 65 years old. This appears from paragraph 167 of the budget speech. Worse still, according to paragraph 168 of the budget speech, the first payments of benefits under this contributory mechanism will be in July 2023. Let us put basic questions, Mr. Speaker, and ask whether this is one of the recommendations of the Pension Reform Committee set up by this government in 2016. Has there been consultation with all stakeholders? Or is it that the arrogance will have it that no discussion is required? Be it as it may, this House, the country, and the nation need to know whether government has started targeting and is not going to pay the promised increases to those aged 60 to 64. If that reading is right, more than 225 old-age pensioners will be penalized over the next 4 years, and worst of all, will have been lied to by no less than the current Prime Minister of this country. Mr. Speaker, people want to know what will happen to the assets of the National Pension Fund. They've invested in MCB, in SBM. We know that they've invested in hotels in exchange for bonds. They have non-cash assets. They are owners of buildings. But these assets belong to the nation, not to the government. Government cannot claim ownership of what belongs to the people of this country. There is a call for accountability, for transparency. And this money has to be accounted for. It's hard-earned sweat, Mr. Speaker. So questions have to be answered. One simply cannot just make up one's mind, take a decision when the interest of the country is at stake. There is a call for discussion at the bar of public opinion. the nation has the right to know, because this money belongs to the coffers of the people, Mr. Speaker. And in addition to this, I've raised a question which is the concern of many people. The effective purchasing power of our elderly, if government, as I say, does not rein in expenditure. And it's all right to say that by 2023, and there is, as we say, the devils are in the detail, but we know the reason as to why 2023 has been, is the year when disbursement will be made. I don't know how many of them will be in this very house by 2023, Mr. Speaker. But even if they decide to go along and disburse the pension, what will be the weightage of the currency? How far will the rupee last? Knowing perfectly well that there is depreciation of the rupee, that cost of living is going up. I hope we don't reach the stage where, like in Zimbabwe, a person cart away a wheelbarrow full of Zim dollars. I hope not, Mr. Speaker. And as I say, there is a gap to be filled in the NPF. Government will have to assume its responsibility. But there's a call to convene a meeting of all stakeholders for onward discussion to see how best this issue can be addressed. But contribution société générale is not the alternative to national pension fund, and will penalize workers who don't even know what the lump sum would be. At least on one thing I tend to agree with Prime Minister, and I'm glad that measures announced by Prime Minister for National Pension Fund to invest into Mauritius National Investment Authority never came to fruition because there would have been lack of oversight. So, Speaker, the new pension scheme will increase pressure on companies which have to pay 6% towards employee contribution, with no upper limit, and this is a hidden tax. It may also lead to the demise of private pension companies. The new system removes any upper limit, as I said, paid, and will place a burden on companies with reduced cash flow and profitability, especially the SMEs. Mr. Speaker, what will happen if the employer and the employee fail to contribute? Will the employee still benefit from the basic pension? How will any shortfall be funded? A responsible government would have produced a white paper and calls for wide discussion with all the stakeholders to look at the best ways to secure our pension. There is a mandatory 5-year actuarial review of our national pension and national savings fund. It's the contribution, as I said, of all workers to a pension fund and has to be managed judiciously, managed by experts. The population has taken good note that the Minister has described National Pension Fund as injuste, unfair, et régressif. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the MCB and PF saga, I must say that it has been well managed. It has a low cost of management, and I would like to pay tribute to those who manage the fund. And I hope Minister will have discussion with representatives of the civil service to know exactly what will happen to the fund. What are the transfer of undertakings given to those employees? So, and there's nothing mentioned as to where the money of the NPF will go. Will the contribution sociale généralisée be credited to the consolidated fund? These are questions that deserve answers. And we are not talking of a small item which can look insignificant. We are talking of contribution made to a common fund by all employees, Mr. Speaker. But this government has chosen to dismantle a pillar of economic and social justice to be replaced by contribution sociale généralisée, which is controversial and has been the subject of much debate even in France. There is reason to reform, but not to dismantle. And if we've reached this stage, it is largely due to the irresponsibility of this government in its endeavor to spend, spend, and spend without any culture of reining in expenditure. This is where we've landed today. Today we're able and we can afford to get money from the Bank of Mauritius. Tomorrow, what will we do when the tide runs down, Mr. Speakers? Who are we going to solicit? Are we going to go like Oliver Twist, looking all over the place frantically and asking for more and more? Or are we going to trade our sovereignty for a few dollars more? This is where we've reached. Today, it is our sovereignty which is under siege, largely to the responsibility of this government. And there's a heavy price to pay for it. We are citizens of a country, proud to be Mauritians, but under no circumstances will we go with a beggar's bowl asking for more and more and more, Mr. Speaker. Either we live up to the expectation of the people, or we condescend to the level of having to ask for more and more, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I say, this government has chosen to be expanded. And of course, they will be subject to scrutiny by Parliament. But we know that it has the tyranny of numbers, and it can flout the law and act indiscriminately. The budget, as I say, is flawed on several accounts. And if corrective measures are not taken, we are heading for social chaos. And you should not, I know our good friend is a specialist in microeconomy and a strong proponent of, how you call that? Modern monetary theories. But let me ask him one thing. Is there any provision in the budget for a shelter and accompanying measures for battered women? Even the Minister of Sports was shocked when he learned, I'm sure when he was told in cabinet, that a paltry sum has been earmarked only for the preparation of athletes for forthcoming games. My friends will elaborate, Mr. Speaker. And this budget fails on sectoral reform and introduces a solidarity levy which has created an uproar among professionals who are taxed massively at the rate of 25% on the excess amount of chargeable income plus dividends in addition to the rate of income tax of 15%, making a total of 40%, and with contribution to pension fund, it can reach up to 45%. I listened to the good honorable minister justifying the reasons for this measure which has been announced in the budget. But we live in a country where there's parity of esteem. And if you want to attract foreigners, don't think that they'll be happy if there is disparity between what a Mauritian should earn and what he or she, as a foreigner, should earn working in sectors where there's a shortage of Mauritian skills. Nobody's against making a contribution to a solidarity fund. Nobody's against. But one has to be just and fair. There's a call for discussion at the bar of public opinion. It's the way you convey the message and you talk to people. And there's a report. I read a comment in relation to those working in Mauritius, foreigners working in Mauritius, who are enjoying the trappings of living on a beautiful island, who rub shoulder with Mauritians, and they feel embarrassed that there is what I would call an apartheid tax regime amongst professionals. And in this sector, people have learned to take the rungs of the social and economic ladder. Its services sector, its brain power has nothing to do with rent seekers. Why do you have to be unfair? But if you had conveyed message and said, well, there's a call to make a contribution, that tax, that call it a solidarity levy, will not last aeternam ad vitam, that there is a cut-off point and cut-off time, so be it. But why don't you say it? Why being unfair to taxpayers? We're not here to make a case for those who are big earners. Big earners or small earners, they all have rights in this country. And rights are not given by any political party. These rights are enshrined in our Constitution. So that's why I make an appeal to the minister to ponder wisely. And if he has to make a U-turn, he has to, because he has to bear the consequences. And let me remind him, keep in mind, Minister, the Velvet Revolution, how it started. And I always say, when you sit on a powder keg, don't keep a box of matches in your pocket. In the light of the fury this budget has unleashed, no sensible person can remain indifferent and sensitive. The velvet glove has been removed, and time to fight this government with bare knuckles. Mr. Speaker, I read the speech with the support of friends. I look at all the items in the budget. My good friend, Honorable Ramford, reminded me that there was a big omission in the budget. And I asked him, what was that omission? He said, there is no provision for the holding of local elections, which are due to be held next year. I thought they were strong proponents of democracy, that they believe in the electoral process, that they were ready to face the electorate at local elections, be it in rural or urban areas. What's happening? Where is the provision in the budget for the holding of local elections? I seek that provision here, I seek it over there, but it's neither here nor there. I don't know whether I have to search the pocket of the minister or somebody else to find out where are the provisions for the holding of local elections due to be held next year. Are you scared to face the electorate? Are you scared? Are you running away? But if not, stand up and be counted and impress upon the Prime Minister that there should be provision in the budget for local elections to be held. I've been told, my good friend, the chairman of the Labour Party, MP, Mr. Patrick Astiavaden, is reminding me of what recently happened in Rivière Noire. They had a taste of their own bitter medicine. What happened? My good friend, Honorable Ganu, who's always in the forefront, in the vanguard of his constituency. What has happened? When the people decides to speak up and speak out, you will land into deep trouble. And it's the new beginning. And they've started to speak without fear or prejudice. We know that this government didn't have the support of 75% of the electorate. 63% of the electorate voted against this government. 63% of the electorate. Mr. Speaker, they can, this is the only perimeter where they can shout and be heard. The tyranny of numbers will not scare any one of us. And as I say, the fight will be conducted in the House and out there. And out there. Oh my God. Who is talking? Mr. Spender, big spender. That's the one who's talking now. Macaroni, at least this is people's diet. Yeah. Yeah. People enjoy plow macaroni or spaghetti. What about you? What about you? Experience. You're sailed by date, my friends. They are sailed by date, and they know it. You're young, acquired experience, which I've acquired over the years in this very house. We're all on the learning curve, and a bit of restraint is good for all of us. Humility is the soul of wit, my friends. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the velvet glove has been removed, and time has come to fight this government with bare knuckles. And as I say, and I make a plea, make provisions for the holding of local elections. Okay. Join the crowd, join the crowd. Mr. Speaker, sir, now I also was taken aback, surprised, that there was no provision in the budget for the setting up of a constitutional court. Whether we like it or not, there are electoral petitions which have been filed before the Supreme Court since late January. And they have to be heard. And I hope that matters will be expedited. And being in winter, Mr. Speaker, this winter of discontent will have political fallout. And government has every reason to think twice before coming with any finance bill which is tailor-made to meet the expectation of the French. Last year's finance bill was tailor-made to respond to the needs of a big punter or somebody who has the monopoly in, what do you call that, fixed odd betting. Now, I hope the finance bill will respond to the needs of the people, and that will be geared or specifically tailor-made to meet the expectation of those who are close to our friends sitting on the other side. Mr. Speaker, equitable burden sharing, and we are all for equitable burden sharing, is an act of patriotism. But the purpose, Mr. Speaker, is defeated if strategic partner is left behind. The object, and this is the object of one and all, and it's the prayer that has to be answered. This is the ardent wish of the people of this country. The object is to keep enterprises afloat and safeguard jobs. And I would advise the minister to read the communique issued by the Bank of Mauritius, which made it clear that it will support strategic sectors of tourism, travel and leisure, and textile. During the interval till we are COVID-free, there is a window of opportunity to remodel the product and to reskill our workforce. And the minister has stated in no uncertain words that any company which opts for financial support from Mauritius Investment Commission, State Investment Corporation, one of the established conditions is the safeguarding of employment. And I'm glad the Honorable Minister is acknowledging this is very important. And as for those who are going to be furloughed or laid off technically, of course, they will be entitled to a financial support. But I would appeal to the minister, and whether we like it or not, recovery is well on the way, and I'm glad that in our great little country, people are back to work. I do grant you that the tourism sector is the one which is going to be worse affected, because according to the IMF, takeoff will only happen or take place in 3 years' time. And in the meantime, during that interval, we have to rebrand, we need to look at the skill of the workforce, and in fact, we need to come up with a new product, which is the product of a new normal. And as many of us have stated, we hope that we'll be able to sell Mauritius as a COVID-free destination. We need to take risks, but of course we need to minimize risk. But under the pretext of the COVID virus, we have to make sure that the acquired rights of employees are maintained. And we have to make sure that the resources which are being disbursed will be used for specific purposes which have to be clearly defined. I'm glad that Mauritians, as we say, have started to kick the can, well, for good reason, not down the road, but some of them are going to spend weekends in hotels. It's a good sign. It's a good signal, small but meaningful. And I'm confident that this great engine of growth will regain its pride. The branding, as I say, is the name of the game, notwithstanding all the necessary precautions and measures that have to be taken. We are looking forward to welcome the tourists. But I'm appalled, shocked, to read that the budget of the MTPA has been reduced by 47%. And I expected my good friend, Honorable Joe Lesongard, to be more forceful, to be more reactive, to fight for what he considers to be just, to fight for a sector which is the engine of growth, a sector which needs to be rebranded. And when he intervened in the debates on the presidential address, he was full of zeal. I don't see it. Oh, you've turned down a little bit. Stand up and be counted. You know, we've known each other since a very long time, and I know you to be very zealous. What happened? You've lost a little bit of your shine and glitter. Fight for a sector which is the engine of growth. Fight for a sector which can generate employment. Fight for a sector which has a multiplier effect. But you've been, unfortunately, very quiet, Minister. Let me come to the Plan de Résistance, the Mauritius Investment Corporation. The budget, Mr. Speaker, sir, provides no transparency on how the funds will be deployed. And we are told that that there'll be investment made in Africa. I'm not saying that we should not, but this is not the optimal choice. We need to have more clarity around governance, financial investment rules, where the fund will be invested. Honorable Duval, on several occasions, has stated that the MIC should be accountable, like everybody else, to a select committee of Parliament and not to operate as an investment arm of the Bank of Mauritius. The latter, as we know, is a regulatory body and is not an ATM, development bank, or investment bank. And as long as the Mauritius Investment Corporation is under the purview of the Bank of Mauritius, the element of doubt lingers. We know what are the consequences, and where is doubt, there is gray shade, and where is gray shade, we know things certainly will go wrong because there's no accountability, there's no transparency. Another Minister of Finance remind us, he was Deputy Governor of the bank, Chairman of the FSC, and then, of course, the CEO of the former CEO of the FSC is now the present governor. Now, I'm not going to highlight the merits of what they have done, but certainly the demerits of what they did far, far outweigh any merit. We know the situation that the FSC is into. We know that it cannot live up to the expectation of the players, and certainly there is a lot of room for improvement. Let me remind our friend that the Mauritius Investment Corporation will bend backwards on instruction of the executive. Make no mistake, as we say, government is government, and government so decides. And on the radio, the governor of the bank stated that more than 15 companies which have turnover of 100 million rupees have submitted the application to be scrutinized by the technical committee and then referred for scrutiny to the assessment and investment committees, and if all is well, will be approved, and if not, set aside by the board chaired by academic Lord Desai. Mr. Speaker, who doesn't like Lord Desai? But between you and me, with all due respect to the honorable gentleman, do you see this gentleman examining recommendations made by the board in detail? This is a new corporation, and I hate to say, and I have to say it loud and clear, it should not operate under the aegis of Bank of Mauritius. As to whether it's a mirror image of State Investment Corporation, time will tell. But it has to be transparent, it has to be accountable, and it has to be managed by professionals. As of now, instructions are being given by the executive in relation to application that has to be processed. And I will come to it later, in relation to an application submitted by somebody who wants to set up a pharmaceutical company in Mauritius. And we know the axis of that partnership. People close to the rank and file of this government. I simply won't drop names, but we know who they are. And one of the applicants, who's in partnership with somebody very close to our friend sitting on the other side, has a case because he was allegedly involved in a shady transaction. I'm sad to say that we have not learned from past experiences, from what we went through when investment bank license was issued to the like of Sobrino, Mr. Speaker. I impress upon government to tread cautiously, to err on the principle of caution, to see to it that the procedures are followed and that a license is not given simply to please people who may be of shady characters. Mr. Speaker, I have stated what others have stated in relation to a deep-seated concern, because we are talking of taxpayers' money, which will be I want to use the word dole out, but which will be allocated by the Mauritius Investment Corporation. It will act as a bank. It will allocate the funds. As for the rules of governance, we don't know how it will be done. But I draw the attention of government, as I said, to tread cautiously. Even though it will not be under the purview of government, of Parliament, and scrutiny of Parliament is in line with the electoral democracy, with parliamentary democracy, but we certainly will raise our voice at when there is the least concern or where there's any deep-seated concern. And I issue a note of caution to those sitting on different committees to tread cautiously and to see to it that the business is conducted in all transparency. Because we know what happened to the SIC. We know that SIC, despite having financial analysts, has been the subject of criticism due to investment in companies which did not have viable structural plan. And there is a legitimate question which has been put, which earlier I highlighted. Will they be able, those companies which are distressed, I don't know whether they've undergone any stress test, will they be able to refund the financial support in due time? Because they can always say that they are cash poor and eventually the quasi-equity or equity or loan will never come to fruition and MIC may sustain loss. And there are lessons to be learned from investment made by NPF in the hotel sector. Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of sanitary emergency, an economic crisis may lead to financial fallout. That's why, be it MIC or any relevant investment corporation, or for that matter, the Bank of Mauritius, they have to assume fully their responsibilities. Unfortunately, their independence has been eroded. MIC has comparative advantages, as it can squeeze bank initially to buy the debt at low market value, which will be a key driver of returns. And banks cannot get away with bad risk taking, and it is in the interest to be a good player for a nice haircut and to equitize debt. MIC cannot afford to mess up. There may be signs, there are signs of recovery, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I hope MIC will live up to the expectation, because recovery means that we don't have to disburse a huge amount, so let's wait and see. Now, Mr. Speaker, we would like also to know whether MIC will give grants or will give loan in foreign currency. And that also has to be told, because we know that it's getting its funding from foreign reserve. Some people may say that Bank of Mauritius can create the money and credit it to MIC, but we want to know if it is going to allocate loans in foreign currency. This is yet to be told. So, Speaker, as matters stand, we are all worried because government is trying to buy its way out of recession by printing money. Dipping too much in the reserves can lead to what we call the Greece syndrome or the Venezuela syndrome. I'm not going to cite Zimbabwe. This is a very sad case. Zimbabwe used to be the London of the region, especially Harare. Now today it has become a breadbasket turning into a basket case. But we all have to understand the new normal also means productivity, competitiveness, and less depreciation of the rupee. Mr. Speaker, sir, as we say, if we want to be role models, or if we want to show cause for a good cause, we should be the first to take decisions which initially will be painful, but I think it's a decisions worth taking. And I'm referring to what many countries, many governments have done, not only in New Zealand, but in many African countries. You know, reducing in the budget, the minister has said that that overseas mission will be reduced and ministers will renew the official cars every 5 years. I mean, I don't want to sound nasty, but this is game for it off. I think they should set the good example and do what the Prime Minister and ministers of New Zealand have done. They've agreed to a 20% cut in the salaries. This is the way forward. In fact, cabinet should have been reshuffled, and the number of ministers should have been decreased, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a responsible partner and patriot, we all have to do our fair share, and as we say, the burden has to be eased off. But there should be equitable sharing of this burden. And as responsible partner and patriot, shareholders of corporate sector have to transfer some of the profits from overseas to recapitalize the businesses. The effort has to be collective, and I'm hopeful it would be. According to a former senior staff of Bank of Mauritius, high net worth individuals and enterprises have invested massively in different portfolios overseas and have huge reserves in foreign banks. Of course, the MRA had the power to gather the relevant information, and in time of needs, I expect that everyone will assume one's responsibility. And I hope that we won't reach the stage where, like the US federal government, a decision was taken to impose a levy of 2% on money deposited overseas by the citizens of America. Mr. Speaker, we are not going to stand by and allow government or corporate sector to have a big helping of the cake, which is getting smaller. And we cannot expect workers also to be happy with the crumbs that will fall off the table. Because I hope, since things are getting better, and I hope that perception and reality and fear that we don't know what will happen to those who are trying to earn a decent living, we don't know what will happen to those who are worried about their jobs, but our prayers hopefully are going to be answered, and I hope that they'll have a job to go and will have food on the table. And the measures announced in the budget to safeguard jobs, unfortunately, are not reassuring. And the minister has to be very clear in respect of assistance that has to be dispersed, not only to those who are going to be furloughed, but as I say, to those in the informal sector and to those who are self-employed. Mr. Speaker, let me come to acquired rights. Now, we're all very worried in relation to to companies which have filed for redundancy because allegedly they are insolvent. I hope the minister will tell us as to the number of companies which are allegedly insolvent, and as to the assistance which is being disbursed to them, and whether the stress tests have been carried out. My fear that we cannot, under the pretext of COVID-19, lay off workers who have worked for several years, who have a binding loyalties to the companies, and out of the blue, an amendment has been brought to the Workers' Rights Act 72A, and to do away with their acquired rights. Mr. Speaker, I hope this amendment certainly can be repealed. I see no reason why we cannot reverse a legislation which has been brought under the pretext of COVID-19. And I will refer to what a lady has stated with respect to the relation between trade union and government. The trade union have to be heard, otherwise, as the lady said, there's no balance of power vis-à-vis the employer. And as signatory to the ILO Convention, the Minister of Labour should be fully supportive of the stand taken by the Committee of the Freedom of Association of the ILO. The right to collective bargaining is a legitimate right. There cannot be draconian amendment, and whatever draconian amendment has been brought, as I say, should be repealed. And I would like to know what advice has been tendered to the Attorney General's office by the ILO in relation to the legislation concerning acquired rights of workers. That has never been said in this very House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, the concern expressed, I've said it in press conference, I've said it in several fora, the concern expressed over Air Mauritius. Air Mauritius is down, but should never be out. And our prayer is to see to it that it reach cruising speed, and we hope that our flagship will remain a flagship. I was a bit concerned earlier in relation to an alleged setting up of a company to serve the region. And I've also been told of people who are likely partners in this in the company. So I hope that people who have access to privileged information in relation to Mauritius, they don't grasp the opportunity and set up companies to serve their own interests. I hope when those who are conducting inquiries, they've taken an oath of loyalty and that there should be no disclosure of sensitive information. Past experiences tell us that such things have happened, Mr. Speaker. So I hope those who are looking at facts, figures, who allegedly will do their level best to save Air Mauritius as a flagship, that they won't set a parallel company to be in competition with Air Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, let me come to reward. During the contagion, the frontline workers have reminded the nation that in the conveyor belt of progress, all workers, irrespective of status, are a major force to be reckoned. And I'm glad that the plea made by one and all to reward them has been entertained. My appeal that we should not leave out those who are equally deserving. The risk takers put the lives of their families at risk, from crew members of Air Mauritius to employees of hypermarkets, hospital attendants, garbage collectors, firefighters, postmen, and many others. I hope they all will be rewarded. While our frontline workers were fighting the contagion, there was another category of workers, of persons, who were equally at risk, if not more, because they were too poor. They were too poor to have protective wear, and they had to move on state lands out of necessity and not choice. Their tin houses were pulled down much to the dismay of the population during the COVID period. This is inhumane. And I'm always in the habit of saying, what the point of being human beings if we are not humane? Of course, we should not encourage people to squat on state land. But those who took the action, those who saw to it that draconian measures should be taken, that the houses should be pulled down, that fear should be instilled, without any support to the children who have been traumatized. And I didn't hear the honorable lady responsible for family welfare, and the other honorable minister, former vice prime minister, going, as we say, paying a visit to those people. Despite appeal that there should be a child psychologist to support those people, no one has attended to the fear of those people, and it has remained unaddressed. And I'm not going to highlight the plea, the cry from the heart made by the lady from African town. And it's sad. I would have expected our friends who have always stood up and fought for the rights of the deprived, those from the low socio-economic group. I would have expected them to create the enabling environment, to bring these people into the mainstream of society. No society can thrive if people are marginalized. Under the previous government, the Labour government, we set up a ministry called the Ministry of Social Integration. We became the regional observatory for poverty alleviation.
No cross-talking.
But I'll tell you what we did for the poor. Had it not been for us, people would have never been full-fledged owners of the houses that they are staying in, the CHA houses.
No cross-talking.
My friends, I would advise you to think twice, because I hail from a party which put a lot of premium on values and the reason why we need to put people first. Let me remind you, you will never be able to worship the ground that we tread upon, so don't make uncalled remarks. So that's why I say, Mr. Speaker, either this government cares or certainly has become the most anchoring government. And when it comes to housing unit for the low-income status group, how many houses have been constructed for the low-income socio-economic group? How many houses? Where are those houses? Year in, year out, in the budget, under specific item, billions of rupees are earmarked. And you see those houses, they're neither here nor there. How many houses were promised? 6, almost 7,000 houses 2 years ago. How many have been delivered key in hand? Yet, hardly any, Mr. Speaker. And you tell me that this is a caring government. You tell me that they will blurt out that they have given negative income support. But what's the point of giving negative income support when the rupee has shrunk? When you're going on a spending spree? When today we know what is happening to our national pension scheme, Mr. Speaker. Sir. You are turning this country into a country not dissimilar to Zimbabwe, where people will carry money in a wheelbarrow. This is what you are doing to our country, Mr. Speaker. Sir. So, live and let live, but live well and be caring, Mr. Speaker. Sir. Mr. Speaker, people's life matters, as we say, whether they're black, brown, yellow, white. But don't hit hard at those. Don't hit hard at those who are at the lower rung of the social ladder. In fact, we need to empower them. There's a call for a cahier des charges and impress upon them that children have to go to school, that they have to take up employment, that they have to raise their profile. There should be a trade-off, I agree with you, but don't treat people with contempt and don't allow people to be marginalized. Be careful. As I say, we don't want this country to sit on a powder keg, because there are people who have matches in their hands. And when I hear so many uncalled remarks from so many different quarters, I fear for my country. That's why I make an appeal to one and all. As responsible people, let us live up to the expectation of these people. But we have to empower them to be responsible. That's the purpose of empowerment, Mr. Speaker. And not like somebody who's loaded with money, dish out if you sweeties here and there, as if, you're helping people. No, that's far from it. Always bragging that we've given negative income support. What's negative income support if you're not dignified? What is the purpose of life if you have no dignity? Mr. Speaker, on this score, I would like to congratulate all those sitting on the opposition bench who went to dispense support to all our friends. I have in mind my good friend, Honorable Fabrice David. Mr. Speaker, I'm almost coming to the end of my speech. Let me say a few words on relance, implementation of capital projects, which are essential for productivity, growth, and competitiveness in the long term. More so in Mauritius, which is a small economy and has a vulnerable index. The multiplier effect of additional capital expenditure on growth is weak because most inputs are imported. Despite Metro Express and other projects, growth in 2019 declined to about 3%. There is no clear and immediate impact on short-term growth and employment. Mindless spending on capital projects often results in white elephant, cut door. Metro Express, I'm sorry to say, will not generate positive returns for many years and will be a burden on public finances. The choice and allocation of projects are important. And in Mauritius, you will be stuck in spaghetti junction, my friend. Hold on. In Mauritius, we do not have a proper public investment management process as underlined by IMF. Under exceptional circumstances, there is a need to freeze non-job-related items such as Rivière des Anguilles Dam or Metro from Cupip to Rosehill. This would save 12.5 billion, and resources could be allocated to micro, small, and medium enterprises when retail, tourism, textile or food sovereignty, and agro-processing. The micro, small, medium enterprises employ 50% of the workforce. But compared to the 80 billion rupees to be invested in the big companies, they've been having, which has a turnover of 100 billion rupees. Unfortunately, they've been allocated, the MCME, only 10 billion of facilities, notwithstanding the procedures, which are very heavy. And find out, Minister, as to the number of persons who've been able to take advantage of this loan. But the priorities, not loan, the priority is cash flow. The priority is to keep them surviving. The priority is to enable those people. They are the ones who generate employment. As shapers and movers of their enterprises, they create jobs. And if you want to deliver on Made in Mauritius, first and foremost, extend the hand of support to the MSME so that at the end of the day, they can raise the fists and say, we believe in a hands-up policy. And so that they can say, we don't need any support from government. Now we can take off. In the past, there was allocation of resources without any conditionality attached. Yes, some people did take advantage, but the majority of those who were committed, who had a sound business plan, the businesses succeeded, and there was a multiplier effect, and they have been successful. We need to revisit the allocation of resources which are being disbursed to small, medium-sized enterprises, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've stated that New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, is coming out of the woods, and its last patient has been cured. And I'm sure we are monitoring the situation. We are seeing to it that there's flattening of the curve, and we have to see to it that it is being sustained, and that we are relentless in relation to test, tracing, tracking, and isolation. Mr. Speaker, I stated earlier that with respect to the amendment to the Pharmacy Act, and when you look at the amendment in relation to pharmacopoeia, fortunately the minister is not here, I would advise government to have a fresh look at this. what it means that we are going to manufacture drugs which are not of quality. And you know, each drug has many side effects. And I'm sure you've heard of counterfeit drugs. You're opening a door to countries, and I have a lot of respect, of course, for countries which manufacture drugs. And had it not been for countries like India, the price of drug to fight HIV, to fight other viral infections would have been difficult. Even in respect of HIV, I'm talking of palliative drugs which are being used. But we have to be careful in relation to counterfeit drugs. And one of the person, as I stated, who will go into partnership with people close to our friends on the other side. And I will not drop it.
That you're repeating.
No, I have to repeat it. I have to reinforce it.
Go to the debate.
I have to reinforce it because this is very relevant. It is the debate. It has to be reinforced. You have to say it many times over and over. If I have to say it here and outside, I will say it. Because they are going to manufacture drugs below, allegedly below cost, but of poor quality. And these people are going to have funding from the MIC. So it's taxpayers' money, which is going to finance the setting up of a company which will not live up to the expectation of a nation. And company whose reliability, whose credibility is in doubt, Mr. Speaker. Sir. And we are talking of a market of 1 billion rupees. So we have to tread cautiously. People in the medical field, people in the pharmaceutical industry, people who are pharmacists, they are worried. And their concern is deep-seated, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me come to the European community blacklist of third countries. We pray that there will be an outcome. That's our ardent prayer, because there are more than 15,000 people working in the global business sector. We pray that we'll be able to address fundamental issues in relation to deficiencies to the Financing of Terrorism Act and combating money laundering. We pray, Mr. Speaker, sir, that in relation to the effectiveness rating, we will address those issues forcefully. To a large extent, the European Union also has not been fair to us. But we have exposed ourselves to unfair criticism and to fair criticism by the European Union. And unless we're on the list of FATF, I don't see the European Union removing us from the blacklist. And I hope that borders will open. But when borders do open, I don't know whether it will happen before October, but I impress upon government, be it at the highest political level and at ministerial level, that there should be a Troika team traveling to different European countries and telling our friends, the Europeans, why is it that you have differential treatment? When it comes to Saudi Arabia, which was involved in the sale of arms and which is responsible for the maiming of innocent people in Yemen. When it comes to Saudi Arabia being involved in the murder of journalists, you have to tell them how is it that Saudi Arabia has been removed from that blacklist. But we have to have the guts, we need to have the guts to tell them there cannot be differential treatment in respect of countries which have violated human rights. It is not because Saudi Arabia can afford to buy arms from European countries that Saudi Arabia should be exempted. But we need to stand up and say it loud and clear, Mr. Speaker. It's not on. But at the same time, we have to take corrective measures to address the situation. Otherwise, we are not a responsible government. We cannot be like lapdogs to those countries simply for a few dollars more. Either we are dignified or we are not dignified. It is the interest of Mauritius which is at stake. It is the interest of those people who work hard to take the rung of the social and economic ladder, working in a sector where there is brain power and no rent seeker, Mr. Speaker, sir. So either we live up to the expectation of those people working in the sector, or we remain quiet and prefer to be lapdogs of countries which allegedly have dollars to dispense. Let me, Mr. Speaker, sir, make an appeal to all of us that under no circumstances should we trade or concede or cede any part of our territories for a few dollars more. And I will appeal to government to read the Sino-British Treaty and tell the UK government, when it comes to your interests in Hong Kong, then you stood up and say that this Sino-British Treaty was approved by UN Security Council and the UN Assembly. The government has to stand up and say what is good for Hong Kong is equally good for us when it comes to our territorial integrity, Mr. Speaker, sir. The time has come to stand up, but fight on issues which are relevant. Fight on issues which are relevant, and not antagonize countries which are likely to be our friends. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to stand up, and at the same time, reach also self-sufficiency, or what I call food sovereignty. Produce what we eat and what we produce. This matter has been debated in this very House when bills on non-sugar sector was introduced, on good agricultural practices. But what we need to have is to set up a land bank. But that land bank cannot be entrusted to land scope. Of all institutions, how can you entrust a land bank to land scope? This is the wrong scope, because we don't know the scale and depth of what they can do to the land, Mr. Speaker, sir. Institutions have to serve the interests of deserving cases. Institutions have to serve the interests of people who have gone through hardship. And there are many young people who are willing to move into the agricultural sector. Today we talk of polytunnel agriculture. We talk of agriculture with the support of Internet of Things. Today we talk of market intelligence. This is the kind of agriculture we want. But for God's sake, let us know where the land is. Let us come with accompanying measures, dispense training, make disburse the appropriate financial resources. But let us cluster our strength, come up with a coherent plan, identify where the land is, knowing perfectly what can grow in this particular area and what can be grown elsewhere. And I would appeal to our friends, when people sow seeds in the land, when people prepare the land through sweat and tears, whether they're occupying state land or not, and if they are not under any circumstances disturbing the life of others, let them grow. Growing is livelihood. Growing is life. It's the seed of life that has gone into that land, Mr. Speaker. You don't treat them with contempt. You don't harass people. You don't use coercive measures, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, this country belongs to all of us, and all of us have a legitimate right in this great little country of ours. As I stated earlier, the government has to revisit its policies. The ministers needs be has to make a huge return, but be responsive to the needs of our country. The country doesn't belong to any particular family, any particular party. It's the country of one and all. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you need some rest. I'm suspending the sitting for 1 hour.